For the next panel discussion, we'll showcase and update you on 3 DSPO programs: Strategic Parts and Material Lifecycle Management, Government and Industry Data Exchange Program, or GIDEP, and Non-Government Standards. Before I reveal too much, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Tim Koczanski and Jim Stein and Ms. Robin Brown to share with us the program updates, new features, and benefits that they bring to the DoD. As a reminder, please post your questions via the Q&A or via email, and we'll give each of the presenters a chance at the end of the session to answer questions as time allows. Thank you. So who do we have up first? Is it Tim?
Hello, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, fantastic. I'm just waiting for my slides. There they are. Well, thank you. My name is Tim Koczanski. I've been with the Defense Standardization Program now for about 17 years. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the initiatives that we've been working on in the non-government standards program. Before I go into specific initiatives that have kind of been the work that we've done over the course of this past year, I wanted to just give a little background on our program, though I think most everybody is very familiar with not only the policy that our office implements, but also the federal policies that flow through us that we provide guidance on. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit of background. Our program office provides guidance for implementing both federal policy as well as DoD policy. This includes the guidance for the use of non-government standards in lieu of military unique. And we provide that guidance in documents such as our procedures manual, the DoD 4120.24M, and the non-government section can be found in Enclosure 9. We also have established procedures for participation with non-government standards bodies. That is in guidance. It can be found on our website, and it's in the SD9. And as I stated earlier, it's important to realize that we don't make the policy. We are the group that is responsible for the implementation of that policy throughout the Department of Defense. So our procedures really flow down from both public law, as is with the example of the National Technology Transfer and Advancement Act of 1995, which really was one of the key documents that described the preference towards using non-government standards in lieu of military unique, as well as other documents such as OMB Circular A119, which really provides guidance for the government, federal participation in the development and use of non-government standards and conformity assessment activities. And that's really how our policy and where we sit in sort of that food chain. Next slide. Okay, so we've had a background and a long history with working with SDOs, even before the 1990s and way back. And in the 1960s, we began promoting the use of non-government standards, and I believe it was the Navy that brought in 12 SAE standards into the federal acquisition system in 1962. Obviously, whenever there were contractions in budgets, policies were strengthened to really push the expansion of using non-government standards, as was the case in the 1980s. And really, the pivotal point for where we are today really came during that mil-spec reform, acquisition reform era from the 1990s through the 2000s, where policies were really strengthened to ensure that we are having a preference towards using non-government standards in lieu of sort of reinventing the wheel and creating our own standards. And I think all in all, we've made tremendous strides with that fact. Next slide. So one of the things that's always music to my ears, working on the non-government side, is hearing how our standardization executives are embracing, the use of non-government standards. It is in the public law. We are told that there is a preference towards it. So what this slide really depicts is, where are we? It's a visual adaptation of not only the organizations that we pull our standards from, and the box on the left really gives a pie graph of the top 10 organizations that probably 90% of our documents in Assist are coming from. And it's not the numbers that I really want to highlight. It's, if you look at those particular standards developing organizations, it's a very, very diverse ecosystem. So it's not just our groups, our DoD standardization management activities are only using non-government standards in a single sector. It's pretty much running the whole gamut. The other chart also shows who's adopting those standards, which service, which defense agencies, and it's just a bar chart graphic representation. But the important takeaway from that slide really is that because of the way our system works, we put the adoption notices into the Assist. What we're doing essentially is giving it visibility so that everybody can see, well, these are the documents that we've adopted. These are who are the government points of contacts on the government side for those documents. So they're open to be used by anybody else in the department. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, and we do that through the Assist database. So this slide shows that on the left, we have the document details page from the Assist where users can log in. They can go ahead and do a search on the document. They can find who the point of contact is. They can read the scope, the title of the standard, the coordinating activities that were involved. And they can also pull at the bottom of that doc details page the PDF of the adoption notice. And the box on the right shows the adoption notice, which gives, who's actually responsible for the document on the government side, where you can download that document from or purchase it from, and so on and so forth. What's missing from this process is, where's the next step? Where's the ability to be able to get to that document directly through Assist, to be able to download it from wherever it is? Currently within DoD, most organizations have contracts with service providers that provide access to documents either on a subscription basis, or activities go directly to the standards developer for the document. What we're hoping to see in the future, it's not here yet, is that third box that says, here's the adoption notice. Now, if you need this document and you're a government employee, here's how you click to get that document, and it would come right down and be part of the entire Assist package. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so there are currently 3 initiatives that I wanted to talk to that we've been working on. And the first one, Enterprise-Wide Access to non-government standards, I already alluded to, that ability to be able to, through the adoption notice, to be able to actually have an area where we have an enterprise-wide subscription so that our users can go ahead and download that into into whatever format they're working on, and not have to worry about, who do I need to find in order to get this standard that has access. Another initiative that we've got currently working that I'll briefly touch on is the service agency consolidation of non-government standards access, which is part of the greater enterprise-wide access, and I'll explain how those two are interlinked. And then the third item that I'll discuss that we've been working on for a couple of years now is the removal of a waiver process that was dictated in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act in Section 875. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so with enterprise-wide access, we've had multiple efforts going on for several years now. The original effort to try and do what I'm proposing was back in 2013. We put together a non-government standards working group that was going to look at ways to bring enterprise-wide access into or through the assessed. And the group worked in order to try and figure out how to make that happen. And unfortunately, they just weren't able to come to an agreement. We got a renewed effort really based on the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. There was a section in the Act which stated that the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics would be responsible for ensuring that those that needed access to these non-government standards had access to those non-government standards. And it states as such, negotiate licenses to be used across the department and to maintain an inventory in order to make sure all that need access to those documents have access to those documents. Following the release of the Act, there was a memo from the Undersecretary of Defense of Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics to the standard acquisition executives and DLA, naming our office to work at coordinating a plan in order to make that happen. And there was a plan to consolidate access agreements, to leverage existing agreements, or to employ whatever other feasible approaches we could have in order to make sure that this can happen, that we can bring these documents in so that those that need the documents, that cite the documents, have access to the documents. And at the same time, we wanted to respect the intellectual property and make sure there isn't any unnecessary sharing, because these are copyrighted. This is copyrighted material. Next slide. So we went ahead and called back the non-government standards working group. We reactivated them, and our priorities for the access part was really quite clear. And this is where we sort of have two parallel activities running at the same time. But from the access working group, our priorities were really to follow the letter of what we had seen both in the NDAA as well as the memo that had been sent out by the USDA TNL. And that was to get access to non-government standards for those who need it, to address any sort of illegal sharing that may be going on, and really to meet the statutory requirements of inventory and negotiate access, which was stated in the Act. Next slide. So when I talk about parallel activities, this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. We decided on two courses of action as a group. Because of the cost and the level of effort that's involved in trying to figure out all that encompasses a contract for access to non-government standards, we needed metrics. So since the Act sort of stated that the activities needed to go and work through and leverage their current contracts, they needed to keep an inventory. We needed data that they had that we didn't have. So we had two parallel actions running together. The first course of action was that the services and agencies would develop independent consolidation plans to show consolidation, and also help by providing us metrics. What are the documents? How many people? What are all the data that we need in order to be able to try and work on an enterprise-wide that we could get together? So they worked at a consolidation plan, each agency and service did on their own. While at the same time, our office took the other path to go ahead and start formulating that data that we received through the working group to put together a POM issue paper that we could submit. Next slide. So as far as the status on both those actions, the services and agencies have done a fantastic job consolidating down. We've received a ton of data that will enable us to be able to exactly see what we need to do on our end. But they've consolidated. They've given us data on what sort of libraries, what sort of access, and so on and so forth, and continue to do so. From our status, we did go ahead and put together a POM issue paper. It was for FY 2020. We did submit it, and unfortunately, it failed. And I don't like really using the term failed, because really everybody, both up and down the chain, that saw what we were trying to do didn't think it was a bad idea. They actually thought it was a very good idea. And there can be a lot of efficiencies that can be very good for the department, good for the services and agencies that need the access. So I always like to say it didn't fail, it stalled. But it just, when you're in this situation where you're palming for money in order to put something like this together, you're locked in with other competing priorities, and ours just wasn't high enough on the priority list to be able to claim victory. So at that point, we were forwarded to the Reform Management Group, which is a joint group that is focused on cost savings through reform efforts. And we had several conversations, both DSPO and our upper leadership, in terms of whether or not this might be a way for us to be able to get the access. And at the end of the day, it just seemed to be at the lower end of what the Reform Management Group works on. And with the data that they would need, it wasn't going to be a good fit. So we both amicably stepped away and discussed our options. And we did bring this issue back up. It was briefed at the Defense Standardization Council meeting back this last summer. And the service executives and DLA were overwhelmingly supportive of going ahead to try to put together another POM. So we did update our figures with the data we had received. We went ahead and put together and submitted. However, by the time, the timing was off. So we were unable to put together a POM for FY22, and we will be POMing for FY23. Next slide. So the last topic that I want to talk about is removal of a waiver process. So also in that 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, there was a subsection, B2, which established a waiver requirement for when military unique specifications are used instead of commercial or non-government specs, and it must be approved by a milestone decision authority. The text actually reads milestone decision authority, service acquisition executive, or the Undersecretary of Defense for AT&L. We saw this coming very early on, so we had meetings to try and say, look, we have a process in place. This process has worked for a very long time, and we don't want to slow the wheels of acquisition down. We completely understand there is a preference towards non-government standards, and we promote that preference, right? But we needed to do something because this was going to create, a sort of roadblock for the services and DLA moving forward. Unfortunately, we were unable to get it removed immediately from the act. We did go as a stopgap to the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment and discussed the matter with Ms. Lord. She issued a memo granting a waiver for the use of approved military standard specifications until the language in the act could be removed. So from a standpoint of process, really nothing changed. The waiver is in place. We can use the document that meets the requirement, but it is something that we have to do. We have to go back and we have to pull that language from the 2017 NDAA, and that requires a legislative change proposal. Next slide. So for the past several years, we've actually been working to try and remove that from the language. In FY 2020, we submitted a proposal which was approved by the Legislative Review Panel. From there, it was submitted to OMB, and the hope is from OMB, it gets submitted to Congress and then can be acted upon. It stalled in OMB. So for the following cycle, we submitted another proposal. This time it was approved by the Legislative Review Panel. It was approved by OMB, and it was sent to Congress. However, with our conversations with our OSD counterparts, the timing that it actually went up for consideration, it wasn't good. It was very late, and we didn't feel that it would go anywhere. And sure enough, it stalled again. So we've had discussions with our OSD counterparts on how best to respond to this, because you're only given so many shots to be able to do these sort of legislative change proposals, and they could come back and say, well, you've tried it, it's just not going to work, and then we have to figure out other channels to go in. However, the good news is we've been approved to resubmit a proposal through the acting Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Mr. Kratsios, and we do plan to take care of it, hopefully once and for all, this time in the FY 2022 cycle. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so we keep clicking back.
Sorry about it. Are we on slide 12 or the last one?
The last one.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. So moving forward, we're going to continue to work with OSD to remove the waiver requirement from Section B2. And just as a side note, we have coordinated this through the OMB process. We haven't had any interagency concerns. It's gone to all the agencies. We fielded questions both inside and outside of DoD on this issue. There really aren't any remaining congressional staff that were around when this ad went in. So there's no one on the congressional side that has any interest, at least that we're aware of, on keeping that in. And we have full support of the DoD agencies and services with this proposal. So we don't expect any sort of issue moving forward. However, I would have probably said that 3 years ago, and lo and behold, we're still here. So we are working towards that end, and hopefully within the year we'll have that taken care of. And I believe that is my last slide. So I will give the time back to the next presenter. Thank you.